Welcome to the programme. We're going to cross straight over to the UN in New York, where the Secretary General Antonio Guterres is speaking about Sudan. Let's listen in.
Bring together the United Nations, the League of Arab States, IGAD and the European Union, as well as representatives from a number of countries that are deeply committed to solving the crisis. There was a strong consensus on condemning the ongoing fighting in Sudan and calling for a cessation of hostilities. As an immediate priority, I appeal for a ceasefire to take place for at least 3 days, marking the Eid al-Fitr celebrations, to allow civilians trapped in conflict zones to escape and to seek medical treatment, food, and other essential supplies. This must be the first step in providing respite from the fighting and paving the way for a permanent ceasefire. I have been personally engaged in doing everything possible to make it happen. The cessation of hostilities must be followed by serious dialogue, allowing for the successful transition, starting with the appointment of a civilian government. The fighting must stop immediately. I am deeply concerned about the terrible toll on civilians, the appalling humanitarian situation, and the horrifying prospects of further escalation. Hundreds of people have been killed and injured. Fighting in urban areas is particularly dangerous for civilians, including children, who have repeatedly been forced to shelter in schools and evacuate from hospitals under fire. This is completely outrageous. Humanitarian operations are virtually impossible. Warehouses, vehicles, and other humanitarian assets have been attacked, looted, and seized. Targeting humanitarian workers and assets must end, and I remind all parties of their obligations under international law, including ensuring safety and security of humanitarian aid workers. I'm also extremely worried about the situation of United Nations personnel, many of whom are trapped in their homes in areas of active conflict. We are doing everything in our power to be able to support them. I will continue to use my good offices in close coordination with our partners to establish a ceasefire, de-escalate tension, and start political talks. The United Nations stands with the Sudanese people in full support of their wishes for a peaceful, secure future and the return to the democratic transition. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Two ceasefires have come and gone. What will the catalyst be to ensure that a third attempt will succeed? Two attempted ceasefires have come and gone. What will the catalyst be for this third attempt to succeed?
I think there is a strong reason. All parties to the conflict are Muslim. We are living a very important moment in the Muslim calendar. I think this is the right moment for a ceasefire to hold. And this ceasefire is absolutely crucial at the present moment. We have been in contact with the parties. We believe it is possible, but everybody must be united in putting pressure for the ceasefire to take effectively place.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're watching Al Jazeera English, where Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General there, making a very short, brief speech to the press about the dialogue that's happened behind closed doors with various stakeholders about the ongoing conflict in Sudan. Kristen Salumi was also listening in for us. And Kristen, it was very clear that the UN Secretary General wants to see a 3-day ceasefire, obviously to mark the end of the period of Ramadan and the start of the Eid holiday, but also an opportunity for all sides to collectively talk seriously about a long-term ceasefire and a long-term peace.
That's right. He said this is the moment ahead of the Eid holiday and expressed his hope that the third time will be a charm, that this is the moment that the ceasefire, or at least a cessation of hostilities, will take place, allowing the parties to come together and have what he described as a serious dialogue and a return to a transition to a civilian-led government. The UN put a mission in Sudan aiming to do just that back in June of 2020. 2020, and the Secretary General expressing concern about UN employees on the ground in the country there. There are about 400 workers, some of them Sudanese local residents and some international staff as well. And he said that many of them have been unable to leave their homes as a result of the fighting. He's very concerned about their well-being, as well as the well-being of Sudanese civilians, obviously, many of whom were dependent on international aid even before the fighting started to take place. He expressed the hope that the message coming out of his meeting with various regional organizations, that includes the Arab League, the African Union, the European Union, IGAD, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, all of them taking part in this dialogue that he just wrapped up in the last hour or so, that the message coming from them was united and strong, that there needed to be a cessation of hostilities and a return to government, civilian government, and a civilian government transition.
Indeed, of course, Antonio Guterres will also be mindful of the fact that Abdel Fattah Al Burhan, the army chief, has also said within the last 48 hours that he doesn't really want outside interference. It'd be interesting to see what he thinks the role of the UN is, because without outside pressure, neither side is going to put their arms down.
Yeah, that's the trouble for the international community here. And what further steps can they take to pressure the sides to come to the table without being in the without having their own peacekeeping force on the ground there? Right now, we're hearing a united message and a call for the military leaders to do the right thing. At this point, we don't see any sign of them taking that message to heart. So for the UN, they are focused on the humanitarian aspects of the conflict right now. The fact that 39 of 59 hospitals are not functioning, that people are going without food and water because they can't leave their homes. Medical assistance is not available as well. So the hope is that this proceeds in small steps, that there is a cessation of hostilities to recognize the holiday, that people can get out of harm's way, that international interlocutors can have more say with the parties on the ground to try to convince them that there is another way forward.
We shall see what happens in the coming hours and whether there is a cessation of violence. For the moment, Kristen Salumi at the UN. Thank you. Now, on the ground in Sudan, thousands of people are fleeing the capital, Khartoum, as fighting continues between the army and the paramilitary rapid support forces. 4 ceasefire attempts over 6 days have failed to stop the violence. The World Health Organization says nearly 300 people have been killed and at least 3,000 injured. Some Khartoum residents are leaving the capital and heading south towards Jazeera state. That's believed to be relatively calm. Others have travelled north from Khartoum to River Nile state, where there's no violence being reported there so far. Katia Lopez-Hodayan has more.
The threat of violence is now too close to home. Days of fighting have left many Sudanese desperate and afraid. Thousands of people are leaving Khartoum.
We were told to get out, anyone who is able to leave, but we can't just sit around. We need to make a living.
The army and paramilitary rapid support forces blame one another for breaking several ceasefires in recent days. The streets of the capital are once again seeing the effects of conflict.
A lot of reports and pictures from people. Also, there is a lot of dead bodies in the street. Some of them that are military and some of them are civilian. Some of them got recognized by the people who were from the neighborhood, but some of them were not.
During the lull in gunfire, some people venture out to stock up on food and water, but supplies are limited. The United Nations warns a humanitarian catastrophe is looming. Many of the country's best hospitals are in Khartoum, where the most intense battles are taking place.
There are few hospitals treating the injured and the number of doctors is limited. There's a lot of overcrowding. That's even though a lot of wounded can't make it to the hospitals because of the fighting.
But for some, leaving isn't an option, at least not yet.
It's all surreal. You see children watching cartoons at home against a backdrop of airstrikes. I was walking outside with a friend who's hosting me, and we heard the sound of an attack. I asked her if indeed it was an airstrike, and she said calmly, yes. It feels strange that people are growing used to this type of situation.
After years of political instability, coups, and fighting, Sudan was on the verge of transitioning to a civilian-led government. Those plans are now on hold again. As thousands of people leave their homes in search for safety, there are fears the violence could spread beyond Sudan's borders. Katia Lopez-Odoyan, Al Jazeera.
Hibba Morgan has more from Khartoum.
Well, people are picking where they are and listening to friends and relatives who had been able to make it out of the capital, Khartoum, and then deciding whether it's safe or not. We spoke to somebody, one of the residents of Khartoum, who was able to leave the capital yesterday, and she said it took her 12 hours to get to Madani city, which is in Jazeera state. Jazeera is just about 180 kilometers away from the capital, Khartoum, and normally it would take about 3 hours to get to Madani. But she said that there were a lot of rapid support forces checkpoints, that they were asked for their identities, and they were asked where they were heading. Now, she was able to get safely to Madani, but many of the people who we spoke to say that they saw the RSF looting people who were trying to leave the capital, that some cars have been targeted depending on the type of cars that people are driving, and that some cars have been looted, forcing people to walk on foot to safety. People have picked Jazeera state in the central part of the country and River Nile state in the northern part of the country because it's been relatively safe over the past few days. But hundreds of others, thousands of others rather, are still trapped, especially around the vicinity of the General Command of the Army headquarters. They've not been able to get out since Saturday when the fighting started. Many people around the capital say that the situation has become untenable. They've been out of water for 6 days now. There's been no electricity, and those who've been injured could not receive medical treatment. And those who have already been in need of medical treatments like renal dialysis, hospitals have gone out of function. So many of them are trying to look for safer options, places where they can get medical attention, and places where they can get food and water and survive as fighting rages on in the capital.
Ryan Sedi is a civilian who's been evacuated twice since the fighting broke out, and she joins me now from Omdurman. Good to have you with us on the programme. It's not been an easy 6 days for you and your family. You've had to move a few times.
Yes, it's been absolutely rough. First, I was in Hayy al-Matar, which is neighbouring the airport and the Riyadh street where the fighting broke. And I was home alone, but I'm already desensitized to bullets. So when I heard bullets, I was like, it's just another day. But when the airstrikes happened, that's when it clicked to me that it's really serious. So I had to take cover and pack a few things and stay on the ground. And the electricity went out, and it was very traumatizing for me at the time.
Explain what goes through your mind when you decide that you have to move, because obviously you don't do it by yourself. You have to, I presume, communicate with friends as to where you go and how you get there safely. Yes. So just explain that journey for us.
So at first we were trying to contact the Red Crescent to help us out, but obviously that was near to impossible to come into the neighborhood of Hayy al-Matar due to the soldiers surrounding it. So we just decided, my neighbors around me, we just decided to risk it and go with our personal cars outside of the neighborhood. But thankfully we left safely. Some folks were traumatized and beat and looted, but thankfully we made it out safely. So we had to organize in the neighborhood group to move out.
So you decided to make the move, but just before that, just explain to us the sort of neighbourhood you were in. Does it have any strategic value? Obviously, there's an airport close by, but is there anything else that would make it a place of danger?
A few streets behind us is where the the RSF located within the neighborhood was a few streets down from us. So in usual days is risky, let alone nowadays. Is day-to-day is just really struggle in the neighborhood. But the past few days it was absolutely terrifying, especially being alone and with no electricity or water. It was absolutely terrifying, and having the risk of someone jumping into your house or knocking your door, it was
beyond, I can't even describe how terrified I was.
So you've moved to a place of safety. During that journey, were you stopped at any checkpoints? Were you asked any questions?
Yes, we were stopped at the gate of the neighborhood. We were searched and a little bit traumatized, but they let us go. Thankfully, we went to Khartoum too, and I'm even more blessed that the house that we went to, I don't even know them. They're strangers, but they're family now to me because of how they hosted me and kept me safe. Also, there was a lack of electricity, but thankfully they have a generator, which they opened so we could charge our electronics, and they could use the water pump, so there's water available.
Ryan, I spoke to another lady just a short time ago, and she talked about forces at checkpoints being very polite and respectful when people were going through those checkpoints. You just described those individuals as they. Were they the military or were they the RSF? I mean, what's your impression of who is actually monitoring and policing these routes?
The RSF. The first checkpoint was the RSF, but now when we fled to Omdurman, it was the army, and we made it out safely, thankfully.
OK. We'll leave it there for now. It's been good to speak to you, and all being well, we'll check in with you. We'll check in with you again, I'm sure, very soon. Just take care. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much.
In Khartoum, essential supplies are running low, and basic services like electricity have been cut. Mohammed Al-Taib has more.
People in Khartoum say they are running out of food and other basic items. Confrontations between the Sudanese army and the rapid support forces has prevented the Rahman family from going outside.
There has been a severe shortage of food and supplies for some time. There is a lack of basic necessities.
Sarah says worries about what they'll eat and drink are overshadowed by her children's fear.
We no longer sleep peacefully. My children ask me hundreds of questions about the current situation, and I don't have the answers, especially my little boy. He panics and gets scared when he hears the sound of bullets and shooting.
Sarah's eldest son remembers when he first heard the gunfire. He was at school, writing an exam. The sound ruined his hopes of celebrating Eid al-Fitr.
I was looking forward to spending Eid happily with my family, but when this fighting happened, it has disrupted all our plans.
The house is in darkness. Electricity have been cut.
Everything that is happening to us is decided by Allah. We will try to stock up on supplies for a month or two, hoping that things will improve.
The family is hoping the two sides will stop fighting and resort to dialogue to resolve the situation.
We pray to Allah Almighty that the fighting will stop, and we appeal to all parties to stop this war.
The city is paralyzed. Shops and businesses are closed, especially on the main roads, where much of the fighting is happening. All people can do is stay close to home, waiting and hoping for a life to return to normal.
محمد الطيب الجزيرة الخرطوم.
Al Jazeera spoke to Sudanese Army Chief Abdel Fattah Al Burhan. Now, he says the country doesn't need outside interference and the conflict will be solved by Sudanese people.
We need to decrease the dilemma of violence. We need to make sure fighting doesn't occur in residential areas to avoid civilian casualties. We need the leaders of the rapid support forces to understand their position, to stay outside the cities and residential areas. We do not need any international or regional interference because we as Sudanese people will reach a point that satisfies us.
Now, the Rapid Support Forces leader, Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, told the Financial Times that we're ready for General Burhan to hit us, but not the civilians. We ask God that we gain control and arrest him to hand him over to justice. Burhan and his gang of Islamists came into power and are not willing to let go.